I think he is, but I'm not certain, and therefore you do have to take it seriously. I think it's unlikely at this point in time that he would cross the nuclear threshold. The U.S. and other countries' leaders have communicated very clearly, both privately and publicly, that the response to this would be, in the words of the U.S. National Security Advisor, catastrophic. That is very serious. He would, if he used nuclear weapons, dig a deeper hole for himself than that in which he is currently finding himself. He's in a terrible position. Essentially, over the past 8 months, Ukraine has built a bigger and more capable army on its soil than Russia has there, and there's really nothing that Putin can do about this. The referendum at gunpoint was just not relevant. The annexation has been meaningless. The martial law that he's now declared will be similarly meaningless. And the partial mobilization has reportedly prompted more Russian men to leave the country than to go to the conscription stations. And those that have shown up or have been dragooned by the conscription offices are not exactly fit, well-trained, and they won't be well-equipped either. So they're the definition of cannon fodder. Reality is that Russia has lost in 8 months more than 3 times what it lost in 9 tough years in Afghanistan. So it's in a very difficult situation. Not at all. And again, all I was doing was providing one possible option that is in a range of options that undoubtedly has been developed for policymakers in Washington and in other capitals of close allies. And this would not necessarily be a NATO operation. This would probably be a US-led multinational operation. This is not about a NATO country. There's no Article 5 collective self-defense action here. This would be a response to a horrific decision by the Russian leader to use nuclear weapons. And as the U.S. National Security Advisor has said, the response would be catastrophic. Now, he has publicly stated that he has communicated this to his counterparts in the Kremlin. Other leaders have done likewise, both publicly and privately. And again, there's just a range of options that would also certainly include more economic, financial, and personal sanctions and export controls. There would be diplomatic initiatives, and a host of other actions that would be in that range of options. One of those, as I mentioned, would be a conventional response led by the U.S. that could, again, dig that hole in which Russia finds itself even deeper by taking out Russian forces on Ukrainian soil, and even perhaps taking out ships of the Black Sea Fleet as well. Well, I don't think that this is a case of strategic ambiguity. I think there's been strategic clarity. Again, the U.S. National Security Advisor has been very clear that the response would be catastrophic for Russia. That says a lot to me. That is obviously much more than just additional sanctions. That has to involve military action. And again, I tend to believe that it would be something led by the U.S. with other close allies and partners, and not necessarily going up the nuclear ladder of escalation. That would be in the range of options, certainly. And again, all I did was lay out in that Sunday show one possible option, which you have repeated here. And that certainly, I would think, would be on that menu from which a U.S. president and other allied leaders would choose. Well, one of many. Everything that Russia has done since 2014 has been awfully dangerous. The unprovoked and literally barbaric at this point invasion of Ukraine and the operations there have been really catastrophic for Russia as well as for Ukraine. And now Russia finds itself where it's losing on the battlefield, and the only capability it has left is that which they can use to punish Ukraine. Missiles, rockets, some bombs, and of course now swarms of Iranian-provided drones that they've been using to target Ukraine's electrical generation and distribution capacity, and have taken out about 30% of that. Now the Ukrainians are incredibly resourceful, determined, and capable of restoring this capacity over time. But again, this is, also obviously a clear violation of the Geneva Convention, the law of land warfare. This is civilian infrastructure. This is not military forces that they're targeting. And they're doing it just because this is all that Putin has left at this point in time, recognizing, I think, as I mentioned earlier, that the use of nuclear weapons would cross a threshold that would be so significant that he would end up in a worse situation than he was before he used them. But again, that is something we have to take very seriously. Well, the tide that matters most is on the battlefield, and that tide is ebbing for Russia. The Ukrainians are continuing to take back, to liberate parts of their country that were seized by Russia since 24 February, having already done so. First of all, of course, defeating the Russians in the battles of Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy in the north, then liberating all of Kharkiv Oblast or province, now making inroads in Luhansk. At some point, you'll see further action in Donetsk in the south. And of course, they continue to creep forward in Kherson Oblast to liberate all of that territory, which is west of the Dnipro River, still occupied by the Russians, whose logistics and headquarters have been pushed back some 70 miles from the front lines, or 70 kilometers from the front lines, because of the very accurate rockets that the U.S. has provided for the HIMARS, the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, the multiple launch rocket system one that is a wheel-based, and that has been so devastating to Russian headquarters, barracks, fuel depots, ammo storage sites, and other locations, that it has degraded what were already inadequate logistics in command and control even farther. So the Russians are in a desperate situation where it matters most, and that is on the battlefield. And you mentioned Chinese weapons. I don't expect to see China violating the sanctions that have been imposed. China has not even unfrozen the $300 billion equivalent in foreign reserves that Russia has put there. So again, I don't think you'll see that happening. Perhaps something from North Korea. The Hermit Kingdom is already basically shut off from the world. But that's an indication of how desperate Russia is, that it has to go to these other pariah nations because it's running out of its own rockets, missiles, bombs, and artillery, and it can't replenish them because of export controls and so forth. You know, reportedly, Russia has been buying washing machines just so they can take the microchips out of them to use in their defense industry. That is not a particularly efficient way to make arms and ammunition.